The morning my son called me a burden to my face, I was holding a cup of coffee I'd just made for him. Not for myself, for him. That's the part that still gets me, even now. I'd gotten up early. My knees don't let me sleep past 5 anymore. And I'd brewed a fresh pot because I heard him pulling into the driveway. 43 years old, and I still made coffee for my boy when he came to visit. Old habits, old love. He walked through the door without knocking, didn't even say hello, just dropped his jacket on the armchair my wife Miriam used to sit in and started pacing. I knew the look. I've been seeing it for 2 years. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about the house." I set the coffee down on the counter in front of him. "Good morning to you too, Miles." He ignored that. He pulled out his phone, showed me something on the screen. Some real estate listing, comparable properties in the neighborhood, numbers I hadn't asked to see. "Do you have any idea what this place is worth right now? The market's insane. You could walk away with $800,000, maybe more." "I'm not walking away," I said. "I live here." "You live here alone." He said it like a verdict. "You're 68 years old. You live in a 4-bedroom house alone. Mum's been gone 3 years. You don't need this place." Miriam had been gone 2 years and 8 months, but I didn't correct him. "I planted those oak trees in the backyard," I said. "I put in that driveway with your grandfather. Your sister learned to ride a bike on that sidewalk out front. I don't need somebody to tell me what this house means." Miles put his phone away. He sat down at the kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one Miriam and I bought at an estate sale in 1987, and he looked at me the way you look at someone you've already decided is wrong. "Dad, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to help you. Karen and I have real expenses. The kids' school isn't cheap. My car needs—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. "Tell me something honestly," I said. "When you say you want to help me, are you talking about me or are you talking about your car payment?" The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then he said something I won't repeat exactly, but the gist of it was that I was being selfish. That I was sitting on an asset while my family struggled. That Miriam would have understood. That was the moment things changed for me. Not because it made me angry, though it did, but because he used her name. He put her mouth around an argument she never would have made. I didn't raise my voice. I just picked up my coffee cup and said, "I think you should go." He went, but I knew he'd be back. "I want to tell you something about myself before I go further. I'm not a wealthy man in the way people usually mean it. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. I drove used cars. I packed my lunch. Miriam worked part-time at a dental office until her knees got bad, and we raised 2 kids, Miles and our daughter Tanya, in a house we bought in 1985 for $112,000 in a neighborhood that nobody was writing magazine articles about back then. What we had we built, slowly, with intention. I paid off the mortgage the year Miles graduated high school. I remember the day I mailed the final check. I stood at the mailbox for a minute before I put it in. Just stood there, because that moment meant something. I never told my kids how much the house was worth. I never talked about it at all. Money wasn't a topic in our house growing up. Not because it was shameful, but because Miriam and I both believed that children shouldn't be raised with an eye on what they'd eventually inherit. We wanted them to build something for themselves. Tanya did. She lives in Portland now with her husband, teaches middle school, coaches the girls' soccer team. She calls me every Sunday. She has never once asked me about the house. Miles was different. Miles married Karen when he was 30, and Karen had opinions about lifestyle that Miles's salary as a mid-level insurance adjuster could not fully support. Over the years, the ask came in different forms. Could I help with their down payment? Could I float them a loan when the transmission went out? Could I put up some money for the kids' college fund? Could I? I said yes more than I should have, not because I was afraid of him, because he was my son, and I loved him, and I kept believing the next time would be the last time. The coffee incident, that's what I call it now, came after the conversation in my kitchen. He showed up 3 more times in the 2 weeks after that, each visit the same script with slightly different words. Then he stopped coming and started calling. Then he started having Karen call. Karen was always very smooth on the phone, very warm, very concerned about my quality of life, and whether I was managing okay out there alone. I was managing fine. But I started paying closer attention. I'm not a suspicious man by nature, or I wasn't, but I'd built a career on looking at structures carefully, at what held weight and what didn't, and something in the way Miles was behaving made the old instincts wake up. He was circling, patient in a way he'd never been before. I didn't know what exactly, but I knew something was coming. So I called my attorney. Warren Gill had handled my affairs for 15 years. He did my will after Miriam was diagnosed, when we updated everything. I trusted him. He was direct, and he didn't waste my time. I sat across from him in his office on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I told him everything. The visits, the pressure, the way Miles had used Miriam's name. Warren listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate about him. When I finished, he said, "What would you like to do?" "I want to make sure that whatever I've built can't be taken from me," I said. "And I want to make sure that when I'm gone, it goes where I intend it to go, not where somebody else decides it should go." Warren nodded slowly. "Have you thought about a revocable living trust?" I had not, but I listened. He explained it to me that afternoon, and I won't pretend I understood every detail on the first pass, but the essential idea was this: I could transfer ownership of my home and other assets into a trust that I controlled completely while I was alive, with specific instructions for what happened after. It would bypass probate, it would make legal challenges significantly harder, and it would let me direct exactly where things went, not in a vague will that could be contested, but in a structured document with teeth. More importantly, it would make it very difficult for someone to claim I was incompetent, confused, or unduly influenced, which, Warren told me gently but plainly, was something I should be thinking about. "Has your son said anything about your mental state?" he asked. I thought about it. "He's mentioned that I'm not thinking clearly, that I'm being stubborn." Warren wrote something down. "That's worth noting." I left his office 2 hours later with a plan. It would take a few weeks to set up properly, but the framework was clear. I also left with a recommendation for a service that could install a home security system, not just cameras outside, but inside as well, in common areas. Warren suggested it in passing. I took it seriously. The cameras went up on a Friday. I didn't tell anyone. The thing about Miles, and I've had a long time to think about this, is that he wasn't a bad kid. I want to say that because it's true. When he was young, he was curious and funny, and he used to follow me around the yard on Saturday mornings while I did yard work, asking me questions about everything. How does a sump pump work? Why do we edge the sidewalk? Why is the sky different colors at sunset? I don't know where that boy went. I think, and this is just my own reckoning, I think he made choices over the years that slowly narrowed who he was. The pressure of keeping up with a lifestyle that didn't fit his income. The accumulated weight of small compromises. I think Karen loved him, but I also think she measured the world in square footage, and I think Miles started measuring it that way too. I'm not saying Karen was the villain of this story. People choose what they choose. But I am saying that what happened next was not something I recognized as something my son would do. It was a Saturday morning in April. I know it was a Saturday because I'd been to my walking group, 4 of us retired guys who walk the park trail every Saturday at 7, and I got home just before 9. I went around the back to check on my garden, which I'd started putting in for spring, and that's when I noticed the back door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it. I always lock it. I went inside slowly. Nothing seemed disturbed at first, but when I went to my office, the small room off the hallway where I keep my files, my computer, Miriam's things, I saw that the filing cabinet drawer was not fully closed. I'm a man who closes his filing cabinet drawers. I stood there for a moment and made myself breathe. Then I sat down at my desk and I went through the folder that had been in that drawer. It was my property file, deed, tax records, the original mortgage paperwork, all of it. Everything seemed to be there, but the folder was in the wrong order. Someone had gone through it. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't call Miles. I didn't call anyone yet. I went to my laptop and I pulled up the footage from the interior camera in the hallway. Miles had a key. He'd had a key for years. For emergencies, I told myself, the way you tell yourself things that make trust feel reasonable. He'd used it sometime between 6:30 and 8 that morning while I was at the park. He was in my house for 14 minutes. He spent most of that time in my office. I watched him open the filing cabinet. I watched him photograph pages with his phone. I watched him put everything back, almost perfectly, and leave. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. I made coffee. I drank it slowly. I looked at the oak trees in the backyard that I planted the year Miles was born. Then I called Warren. Warren was calm, which helped me stay calm. He told me not to confront Miles yet. He told me to send him the footage, which I did. He also told me something that I hadn't fully considered. Depending on what Miles did with those photographs, there could be a legal issue. If he was going to attempt to use that documentation to claim power of attorney, to challenge my competency, or, worst case, to attempt a fraudulent transfer of the property, the fact that he'd entered my home without my knowledge and taken those photographs without consent would matter. Let him make his move, Warren said, and we'll be ready. 2 weeks later, Miles called. He said he'd been doing some research. He said he had some concerns about my planning and whether I had the right protections in place. He said he'd found an elder law attorney who could review my situation and make sure I was protected. The language was smooth, practiced. I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed it. I told him I appreciated his concern. I told him I'd think about it. I hung up and called Warren. 3 days after that, I received a certified letter. It was from an attorney I'd never heard of, claiming to represent my son. The letter stated that there were questions regarding my capacity to manage my affairs, and suggesting that a guardianship evaluation might be in my best interest. I read it twice. My hands were steady. I want you to know that my hands were steady. Because I was not surprised, and because I had already done what needed to be done. The trust had been finalized 10 days earlier. I'm going to tell you what was in the trust because I think it matters. The house, which by then had been appraised at just over $900,000, which still astonishes me when I think about what we paid for it, went into the trust. So did my retirement accounts and a small investment portfolio I'd built up over the years. The total with everything was somewhere around $1.3 million. I know that sounds like a lot. For a county engineer who packed his lunch for 30 years, it is a lot. Miriam and I were careful people. We paid attention. Here's what I decided. A portion, enough to be meaningful, not enough to be life-changing, would go to Tanya. Not because she asked, but because she never did. Because she built her own life without looking over her shoulder at mine, and that deserved acknowledging. A portion would go to a scholarship fund at the state university where I studied civil engineering. First-generation students, preference given to kids from the county where I worked. That one felt right in a way I can't fully explain. The remainder would go to 2 organizations, one that supported elder abuse prevention and legal services for seniors, and one that provided affordable housing assistance in the area. Both causes that Miriam cared about before she got sick. Miles was not in the trust. There was a letter for him, though. Warren helped me write it. It was not angry, I want to be clear about that. It didn't say the things I might have said in the first weeks after I saw that camera footage. It simply said that I knew what he had done, but I understood he was in a difficult place financially. but I had loved him his whole life, and I still did. And that love, I told him, didn't mean enabling, it didn't mean surrendering, and it didn't mean pretending. The letter said that if he ever wanted to know his father, not my house, not my accounts, not my will, but me, the door was open. I don't know if he'll walk through it. I want to tell you how it ended, legally, because I know that's what you're wondering. Warren responded to the attorney's letter within a week. He documented the trust, my mental evaluations. Yes, Warren had me see a physician who certified my cognitive health formally, which is something I'd recommend to anyone in my situation, and the security footage from the morning of the break-in. The guardianship inquiry went nowhere. Once it became clear that I had documentation, legal representation, a fully executed trust, and camera evidence of my son entering my home without permission and photographing private documents, the other attorney withdrew from the matter within 3 weeks. Miles called me once after that. He didn't apologize. He asked if we could talk. I told him yes, but that I needed some time first. That was 7 months ago. I still walk the park trail on Saturday mornings. My knees complain, but they carry me. I'm putting in tomatoes this year along the back fence, Miriam's variety, a beefsteak hybrid she liked because they were, she said, the only tomato that actually tasted like a tomato anymore. I've got her notes on when to plant and how deep. I follow them exactly. Tanya called last Sunday the way she always does. Her younger one made the soccer team. She asked how the garden was coming. We talked for 40 minutes. Before she hung up, she said, "Dad, you doing okay?" "I'm good," I told her, and I meant it. As a thing that happens when you stop waiting for someone to acknowledge what they've done to you, when you stop requiring their recognition in order to move forward. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean the hurt goes away. But somewhere along the way, the weight shifts. It becomes something you carry differently. I look at those oak trees every morning. They're taller than my roofline now. I planted them as saplings 30 years ago, and there were years, many years, when I didn't consciously think about them at all. They were just there, growing in the background while I was busy with other things. Maybe that's what integrity looks like over time. You tend it early, you forget about it for a while, and then one day you need it and it's there. Taller than you expected, solid in ways you didn't plan for. I built this life, every part of it, and I kept it. I keep coming back to that Saturday morning, the filing cabinet drawer left open just a crack, such a small thing. But I spent 31 years in engineering, and if that work taught me anything, it's that the small things are always where the truth lives. Miles thought I wouldn't notice. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger of it, but the assumption behind it. That I was too old, too tired, too worn down by grief to pay attention anymore. That the years had made me soft in the wrong ways. What he didn't understand is that the years had made me careful. I've thought a lot about what went wrong. Not to assign blame in a clean, simple way. Life doesn't work like that, and I've lived long enough to know it. But there's a cause to every effect, and if I'm honest with myself, I can trace the line. Every time I handed Miles money without a real conversation about responsibility, I was telling him something. Every time I smoothed over a problem instead of naming it, I was teaching him that problems don't need to be faced. I loved him in ways that sometimes looked like avoidance, and avoidance has a cost. That's not guilt, that's just reckoning. The thing about integrity, real integrity, the kind that holds up when it's tested, is that you can't manufacture it in the moment you need it. You either built it over time, or you didn't. I built mine slowly, the same way Miriam and I built everything, without shortcuts, without pretending, paying attention to the details other people skipped. The trust I set up with Warren wasn't a reaction to what Miles did. It was the result of a lifetime of thinking clearly about what mattered and why. That's the only reason it worked. And Miles, my son, who I still love in the complicated, aching way you love someone who has disappointed you deeply, Miles made his choices from a different foundation. He made them from fear and want and the kind of short-term thinking that feels like strategy but isn't. He walked into my house that Saturday morning believing that if he just got his hands on the right papers, he could reshape the situation in his favor. He didn't stop to think about what that said about who he was becoming. That's not a failure of intelligence, it's a failure of character that intelligence can't fix on its own. I'm not angry at him anymore. I want to be clear about that. Anger is easy, and it's also expensive, and I've stopped paying for things I can't afford. What I feel now is something closer to sorrow, and alongside it, a quiet, solid kind of peace. The peace that comes from knowing you didn't flinch. That when it mattered, you thought clearly, acted deliberately, and held your ground without cruelty. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't beg him to be different. I just made sure that what I built couldn't be taken from me, and then I let the facts speak. Those oak trees are blooming right now. I can see them from where I'm sitting. I planted them when Miles was a baby, back when I couldn't have imagined any of this. Back when the future felt like a thing you moved toward together. Some futures don't work out the way you planned. But if you've been paying attention, if you've stayed honest with yourself, kept your wits about you, and refused to give up on what you know is right, you get to keep what matters most. I kept mine.